Since this is the first session of the day, I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. So we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates, whether we operate in person or virtually. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting, although virtual, takes place on a land that is still the home of many Indigenous people across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So, for those of you who need a quick reminder, my name is Olivier, and I'll be your host for today. And I'm an assistant professor in the teaching stream in the Faculty of Information. I've been in the Faculty of Information running the User Experience Design program since 2016. But I've been at U of T in different capacities since September of 2002. And I teach in the area of HF, which is known to be human factors, HCI, human computer interaction, UI, user interface, and UX, user experience. So although they have different terminologies, it's pretty much the same family of disciplines that really focus on something that we call user-centered design. So putting the user at the center of your design process and making sure that users' needs and users' goals are considered when designing something, whether that thing is. As I mentioned yesterday, in a lot of my courses, I teach students how to design technologies and how to make sure that these technologies are well fitted for users. But today, and in the symposium, we're focusing on designing teaching experiences and learning and teaching experiences. And this is what this session is going to be about as well. So a quick recap of where we are. So yesterday in the opening plenary, many of you were around because I do recognize some of the names on the list of participants. Yesterday, we went through a discovery and define phase, and it was very well done, I have to say. We've looked at the data yesterday afternoon with Megan from CTSI and a team of student volunteers from the Faculty of Information. And we're just amazed at the amount of data and the amount of opportunities and ideas that people put into the opening plenary. So if you were there yesterday, thank you so much for contributing, because it was just amazing to see all this activity. So during that session, we were able to collect data and collect what we call opportunities using an opportunity canvas. And in between yesterday and this morning, we analyzed this data and we're ready for today's session, which is going to be about further defining and starting to create. All of this is going to be further synthesized this afternoon, and then a closing plenary we're going to have tomorrow. All the playbacks and a panel of academic administrative folks commenting on some of these ideas that are really, again, growing organically, right? This whole process is all because of you, the participants. It's because yesterday you contributed some data and today you're gonna further contribute to the process. So it's really amazing to see this. Okay, so I'm trying to, okay. Our agenda for today is do a quick recap of the opening plenary. We'll do two exercises today. The first exercise is called a big ideas canvas exercise, where you're going to be able to think about big ideas. And I'm going to explain what that is in a few minutes. And then we'll take a break in between the two exercises. And then we'll do a last exercise, which is a prioritization grid. Once we get our ideas, we're going to be thinking about how feasible they are and how impactful these ideas will be for, again, designing for the future and teaching and learning, all within that context, obviously. So quick recap about design thinking, right? Design thinking is a problem-solving process or a set of methods that allow you to solve problems creatively. and typically broken down into 4 phases. But again, I don't want it to be too prescriptive because it can be adapted to all kinds of different situations and all kinds of different domain. But you got to start by discovering and understanding the space that you're playing with, that you want to solve problem for. You have to define it, create it, and evaluate some of your creativity. So it's the process of converging and diverging that I talked about yesterday, right? And you saw it, hopefully you've experienced that yesterday, like the first exercise that we did in the opening plenary. It was really chaotic, like, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's good. I like to hear that word once in a while, because it means that there's a lot of things and there's a lot of ideas floating around. And sometimes you look at all this and you're starting to have a little bit of a headache almost, right? And your brain and your eyes are looking at all kinds of hundreds of pieces of data, and how are we going to make sense of this? But then the design thinking process gives you tools and methods in order to further refine this data and make sense of it and start understanding it. So this is the converging process, right? So anytime you're in the discovery and the creation phase, you're diverging. Anytime you're in the define and the evaluating phase, you're converging. So there's a lot of movement and there's a lot of back and forth. So whenever you do design thinking in whatever domain you're doing, please do not feel discouraged by the fact that things might not make sense right away and things might be a little chaotic here and there. Like, that's okay, because down the pipeline, there will be tools and methods and ways to make sense of all this and to eliminate things that should not be part of your data and to keep the things that really matter, right? But don't make these decisions right away at the beginning. Let the process inform these decisions. I hope you remember these 3 questions we asked you. What do you want to leave behind? What do you want to take forward? And what do you want to explore further? These were the foundation question of our start yesterday in the opening plenary. And look at all these nice boards that we got. Like, so my student and I yesterday looked at all these boards and digested all this data. People put their sticky notes in, they start colliding them together. They're starting to find affinities between sticky notes that were similar or related to one another. And they started naming groups of stickies. It's the process of basically converging your raw data into what we call an affinity diagram, right? Finding things that have an affinity between one another and then putting them together and grouping them and naming these groups. And then later on, we went into an opportunity canvas, which is allowed you to define opportunities and think about, who are the users that would be impacted by these opportunities? What kind of risk and benefits do we have? What kind of outcomes do we want from these opportunities? And what kind of technology and resources do we need to put these opportunities together? And all of this led to this beautiful diagram here, which I'm going to introduce to you just right now. And that's the converge. That is basically the converging point of the opening plenary, which we were very happy to get to at around 4 p.m.-ish yesterday, 3:50, 4 p.m. yesterday. And it's always a happy moment when you get to that point, because what happened is you start seeing the light and making sense out of data, which is great. Like, this is a very a joy of design thinking. So I'm going to put the URL in the chat. Give me 1 second, please. And some of you can go into Myro and start looking. At this moment, I would ask you just to look, please. There's the URL in the chat for the Myro board. And so the way it's organized, and you see it here on the screen, is we copied the raw data from the opening plenary at the top. Just in case you ever want to refer back to it, it is there. It is not meant to be really interacted with today, but it is there to see if you want to see it. And then underneath the raw data, we have the digested, the converged data, and the opportunities. So let me look at this for a second. And let me highlight what opportunities people were thinking of. So we have people who thought about opportunities related to flexible teaching and learning. So that was a theme of stickies. And we've put underneath this theme some of the stickies that were related to this theme. And not only that, but you see, if you look closely, that each of the sticky is tagged. This is an important part of design thinking. When you do design thinking with many different groups of people, you have to tag your stickies, because one day you might want to go back to that raw data and you need to know where it comes from. So for example, this is an idea that was brought up in room 3 and room 15 and et cetera, et cetera. Some stickies may have double tags as well, because they come from two different, same ideas come from two different rooms. We have a team around mindfulness, around student accessibility needs. We had a team around teaching accessibly and creatively with online tools and digital assets. We had a theme around collaboration with students on processes and tools. So student as partners, basically, as we call it in the world of teaching and learning. We had a theme around rethinking student engagement. How do students engage in our classes and with our material in our courses? We had a theme around involving more parties in teaching and learning. Enhancing learning supports. Reimagining student assessment was something that was mentioned by several groups yesterday. And reimagining physical classroom and learning spaces. So we have 9 themes, and these are the themes that we're going to be working with today. Our first step will be to think about what are some of the ideas that we can put together around those themes. So we're talking about being flexible in teaching and learning. What are some ideas that we may have to actually be flexible in teaching and learning? You could see that all opportunities and all themes are labeled A, B, C, D, E, et cetera, and they're also color coded. And this will become important later, because we want to make sure that people can develop ideas around certain themes, but we also want to know which ideas are related to which themes. So the color coding or the labeling is very important. So I'm going to leave Myro for a second here. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint presentation. And we're going to get started for today. We're going to get started with this method in design thinking called big ideas. And it's called big ideas because it's not just ideas. Ideas sometimes can be very refined, very precise. If you teach in a technical field like computer science or engineering, you may be thinking often of requirements, right? Like you teach courses maybe, or you teach your students about requirements, and requirements are very precise, and they're stated in a certain way that they have to be met, right? Big ideas are a little bit higher level than ideas. They're like your 20,000 feet or 10,000 feet type of thinking, where you might not have the whole idea perfectly refined right now. You might not exactly know as well how it works in many details. You might not have all the requirements attached to the ideas, but you have the concept. That's what it's a concept idea. So, you want a system that will be able to let you do X, right? How is that going to be implemented later, and how is that going to be articulated in a lot of details? That comes in a later part of the design process, when you start to prototype and sort of implement and test and put that system together. But at a 20,000 feet or 15,000 feet level, what you want is you have a sense of, yeah, it would be cool if student could do X, Y, Z, or could do X. And that's your big idea, right? So in design thinking, we use this term big ideas to say, don't let the requirements and the implementation details bog you down at this point, right? Don't really ask yourself, well, how is that going to be feasible? just go a step or two above that to start with. You can always refine later. That's never a problem. Ideation curve is complex. Some of you just got up this morning and it's still early for you, maybe in the morning. And I'm asking you to, come on, let's go, let's ideate, right? Let's do this. Well, your brain might not really feel like ideating right now. There's a possibility of that, right? Some people get ideas in the shower. Some people get ideas by driving in a traffic jam, and they start, thinking about stuff, and then whoop, they get an idea. And so the idea curve is complex. It's hard in the design thinking process. I always tell my student, we have a full studio dedicated to ideation. And the thing is, I tell my student, I'm asking you to ideate in the next 2 hours, but maybe your more fruitful ideation period will be tonight when you go home after the studio, and you'll start thinking about all you've done in the studio. And this is where you'll get the nicest, biggest ideas flowing through your brain, right? So it's hard for people to ask others to just ideate. Come on, let's create ideas. So I just wanted to acknowledge that from the get-go, because it's 9:20 in the morning on Thursday, and some of you may have had a late night or not, or you're busy with other kinds of things in your life. And so generating ideas is not something people can just do on the fly right there. Out of many, many ideas that are generated, the majority of them will be scrapped. And this is why we call them big ideas. We don't want to get into the requirements and the fine details right now, right? A majority of ideas that are generated in design thinking ideation are left aside often and are not really, they don't go anywhere. So, and you have to be willing to accept that. It's kind of this idea again of the ambiguity of the design thinking process, right? And I know there's a question in the chat. I'm going to get to it in just a second. One of the things too that you may want to sometimes generate is these things called absurd ideas. Absurd ideas are normally not going to be implemented because they're absurd. But at the same time, I would encourage you to not discard them and keep digging around these absurd ideas. These absurd ideas often are underlying things that are needed in a system or in a design process. It's just expressed in an absurd way, right? So a few years ago, there was a very popular downtown Toronto bakery that opened. Uncle Tsitsu, for those of you who know the place. And the bakery was very, very popular. It's an Asian bakery, and lineups, like complete lineups everywhere. Like it was very, very good. Now there's multiple locations around town, but back then there was like only one location downtown Toronto, I believe around Dundas and Bay-ish. And it was completely insane to get there. And it was at the time where social media and internet was around, but it was not like today for sure. So there was a person across the street who would actually monitor the lineup from his window and would post on Reddit times that were like there was not a lot of lineup. And there was other people monitoring this Reddit feed to actually find, okay, there's not a lot of lineup now, I'm gonna go, right? So if we think about the idea behind this, right? Like it's completely insane. Like, I mean, the big idea is let's pay someone to stand across the street in an apartment to actually monitor the line and post on Reddit. So it's like the big idea is I would like to have my own personal person that monitors the line and lets me know when the line is not busy, right? So nobody would ever think that this is a feasible and an implementable idea. And the person, in fact, was doing it just for the fun of it. But if we think about it as a system implementation, right? Like, who would ever thought of paying a person just to monitor a lineup for them? But the bottom line is that underneath this absurd idea is the fact that there had to be some kind of way to let people know about the wait time, right? And we didn't have Google Map at the time that could tell you by clicking on the name of a bakery whether it was busy or not and what time of the day it was busy. But all these features in Google Map come from those needs. They come from all those people around, North America and other places that in the mid 2000s, 2007, 2008, 2010, when the Google Map technology was not as advanced as it is today, were actually self-monitoring line and opening up their own feed and posting things on social media to let others know when things were busy or not, right? And today we have technologies to do this. So while the idea of actually having someone do this, like, on a 24/7 basis from the window of their apartment is actually a very absurd thing to think of. And the needs and the goals for the users underneath that are actually things that we need to surface in these absurd ideas and move forward with, right? So Diane had a question. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to go back. Question for Olivier then. In the design thinking process, are we supposed to be constrained by the data from the previous phase? Technically, yes. In a sense that it's kind of a funnel model, and not, you don't have to be constrained all the time, in a sense that, so it's yes and no. It depends. It depends is my favorite answer to the students, and is the answer they hate the most. So I definitely encourage people to use data from the previous steps to inform future steps, because then it makes the previous step valuable in the process, right? It makes you feel like you didn't just do this data collection for nothing and all that. But at any point in time, there is opportunities to integrate new data, to get new things, to think about things different ways. So it's not completely constrained on the previous data. The previous data definitely helps, but it still remains an open-ended process throughout the whole cycle. I hope this makes sense. So ideas is about, messy clustering, remixing, converging, prioritizing, et cetera, et cetera. So when you ideate, defer judgment as much as possible, go for quantity again. You can take about, we're in a diverging state right now. We're entering another diverging state. So quantity over quality. Engage with wild ideas, because wild ideas will often lead to something that's maybe doable down the pipeline. If you want another crazy story about big ideas, you can Google the honeypot story, big ideas. I'll try to find the link in the break and put it in the chat. It's a very, very interesting story about how an absurd idea can actually lead to a perfect solution. Build on ideas from one another. That's why we're putting you in breakout rooms. Stay focused on the topic, in a sense that we're designing for the future of teaching and learning. So that's what we should be focusing on. Be visual. Don't go too much in details, and consider like it's kind of like, this feature on Google Map, it's kind of like having somebody who monitors the line for me. And anytime I want to know if it's busy or not, I can go and I can click and I know whether it's busy or what times of the days it's busier or not, right? That it's kind of like is a very good way to get your brain flowing and ideas going. We don't have to do this today, but whenever I encourage my students in the design thinking process to do some ideation, I actually ask them to draw a little sketch of the idea and a headline and a little bit of a caption to explain it. Why? Because I want it to stay a big idea. I want it to stay at the 15,000 feet level. I don't want it to go into like, don't give me a list of requirements. That's not what I want. I want you to say, I want my own security concierge that will serve up to blah, blah, blah. And then here's the little picture of the security concierge, like helping me with my needs, right? Like this is the big picture. So I like the students to have like a little drawing, even though, you know, if you cannot draw very well, don't be inhibited by your drawing abilities. Otherwise, if I was constrained by my drawing abilities, I wouldn't be a professor in user experience design. Let me tell you that. You know, drawing is, there's people can draw good, not good. Like there's many levels. But you know, if you can draw a circle, a square, and a triangle, you're pretty much good to go. Look at your iPhone right now. Look at all the major components that you're interacting with on a screen. It's pretty much rectangles, square, circles, and triangles. So it's not that difficult, trust me. Everybody can do this. And then a headline and caption. So we're going to go into our first exercise. And again, we're going to start this day individually again. And we're going to be looking at 7 minutes. I want you to go in the Myro board. Okay, so I'm going to put it back on the screen for a second. I want you to go on the Myro board, and the URL is there. And I'm going to put back the URL for those of you who just joined. Give me 1 second here. So I'm just going to click my share button here and copy this to my, perfect. I'm going to put the URL here. I want you to go on the Myro board, and I want you to take 7 minutes to explore these themes. Look at these opportunities. I want you to focus on the part, and you can zoom in and out on the opportunity parts. And I want you to start thinking of ideas that you may have around these themes, and just draw them, take them on a piece of paper, like, you know, like, or a notepad or Microsoft Word, Google Doc, whatever you're working with today, right? Just think about, browse the themes and think about some stuff that comes to your mind when you look at these themes in terms of big ideas, and just draw them down on a piece of paper. And then we'll be back in 7 minutes, and I'll put you in a breakout room. Okay, great. I hope everybody had some time to look at all the boards and generate some ideas. There was, I was catching up with the chat here. There is a comment from Jennifer Murdoch. Thank you so much for your comments and discussion here. I see some other people have replied as well. And we're gonna add a theme. I've just asked Ariana to do this, so just be patient. It will come up as a J theme in a few seconds around rethinking and enhancing instructors' support, I believe is the theme that we've decided on based on Jennifer's comments from in the chat. So thank you so much. And that is, whoops, excuse me. Yes, I understand. Give me 1 second here. I'm just trying to do too many things at once now. Like, I'm really sorry, I'm lost track of my Zoom. Give me 1 second. As I'm just trying to look at the, okay, so I think it's good now.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So we're gonna add one more theme for people to work around if they want to. And then there won't be any stickies underneath that theme, but you'll have the headline. And then it all again shows how the process is organic, and how to Diane's question earlier, we can be informed from the data previously, but we can also be flexible enough to add and to organically grow this as we go. So thank you so much. So the next part will be to go into Myro and look at an opportunity at the big idea canvas. So big idea canvas is fairly simple. Is in order to value outcomes. So it's value creation, right? An idea is to be related to the value. If you remember yesterday, if you attended the opening plenary, the last bits of the opportunity canvas was the value outcome. So basically what we do is we take these value outcomes again, and we bring them to our opportunity big ideas canvas. And we say, in order to create the following value or to promote the following value, our big idea is, that's your statement. You know, we want blah, blah, blah. And it's a big idea, right? 30,000 feet, 50,000 feet level-ish type of thing. That will have these key benefits. It will transform teaching and learning by doing something. And it'll be successful if something happens, or we have some kind of ideas of how we can measure or know whether it's a success. And but how at the same time, we will keep in mind the following assumptions. In order for this to be successful, we need these things to happen. So when you develop your big ideas as in your group, I would ask you again to keep the color coding for the ideas. So if you look at the idea board on Myro, which is right. Okay, where's my Firefox? I might have closed it now. Yeah, to get rid of that black box that was there. Okay, so if you look at the idea board on Myro, they're all color coded in the opportunities, and they have A, B, C, D, E. You can use the ABC terminology, or you could use the color code. So when you work on one idea, keep the color coding standard across these 6 boxes. Then when you have a second idea, keep the color coded standard across these 6 boxes as well. If each breakout room can generate 2 to 3 ideas, that would be good enough for today. We're not asking you to like generate a pile of ideas, right? So again, in order to address the values that we have as part of these themes and sticky notes, we have these ideas that are coming together or that are floating in our head, and you keep on further developing them. Okay, great. I'm going to stop my share over here, and I'm going to, oh, there's my Firefox window. I'm going to put the URL for the Myro board, which for those of you, because there's some more folks that just joined. You go to the template, again, same as yesterday. I'm really sorry here. Okay, good. I'm going to share this. Okay. Now I see my window. Perfect. And we've added the 10th team over here. So you're going to work in these templates right here. So you're going to go to the template that corresponds to your breakout room number. Your breakout room number is always shown on the top of your Zoom window. This is going to be your template as a group. So you can zoom in here, and you're going to be working on the first template using sticky notes. Don't worry about these dots right now. That's for later. But we're using this first template over here. Okay. So I'm just going to put the instruction in the chat, and then we'll be on our way. So design session, instruction, perfect. Chat window. Okay, there's the instruction. And we're ready to go, folks. Do we have the breakout room set up, Ariana?
Yes, we do.
So we can open up the breakout rooms and get started. Hello, folks. Oh, almost everybody's back. Welcome back. I'm convinced I could have given you another hour to do this. And because once the ideas start flowing and the juice goes and all that, like there's a lot of productive time and you start thinking about all kinds of things. Unfortunately, we are constrained in time, and that's the way it is. So we've decided to go all the way to 10:30. And so I'm going to show you what the next piece of the process is. And it's a divided piece between yourself today and ourselves this afternoon. So once we get, and again, like I'm skipping ahead a little bit here, right? So please bear with me and understand that I'm doing this for the sake of giving you a big picture. But once we've generated a whole bunch of ideas, and I get students to do this in class, and the next thing we want to think about is prioritizing those ideas, because idea generation, again, is very divergent. and it's often all over the place. We kind of need to step back and start converging. So when we prioritize ideas, we typically vote on them and we plot them on a grid. So today I'm going to ask you to do the voting, and the volunteers this afternoon are doing the plotting. Typically, we vote on two dimensions, but you can have more dimensions if you want, and you can change the name of the dimension. So the process is flexible for this. But we want to vote on impact and feasibility a lot of the time. And it's important to define those two dimensions because impact and feasibility may mean different things for different people, right? If you talk to an IT department, feasibility might be different than if you talk to your marketing department, for example, right? So today we want to look at the impact to the learner, right? Does this idea that we put together transforms a pain points into a delight? Does it expand the learner's value, right? Does it bring a differentiating factor? Is it making a difference, or do we think it's going to make a difference in vis-a-vis the way things are done at the moment, right? So is the idea impactful? That's the first dimension. The second dimension is the idea feasible? Like, can we do this as an organization? And can we take this to our teaching, right? Is that feasible? And sometimes is it technically feasible? So this is why when you do design thinking ideation session, it's very good to have people from multiple places in your organization, IT folks, professors, students, whatever, so that because these concepts of feasibility and impactfulness might differ from people to people. And people will vote on these ideas based on their own perspective and their own value, but the diversity of all these perspective and value would allow you to get into some very good discussion about how to prioritize those ideas. So the diversity of opinions and impactfulness and feasibility is actually a good thing, and it's helping you move forward. Because if everybody thinks the same way, then you're definitely missing another part of the pictures that you're not able to see, right? Everybody might think that something is feasible based on their perspective, but then there's other groups in the organization that might bring their own perspective on feasibility as well. So typically we give people a certain number of votes, dots, right? We do this with little dots, like colored dots. And the more idea you have, the more votes you're going to give to people. Here today, I'm going to ask you to use 3 dots because we only have 2 to 3 ideas per board at this point. But if you had like 30 ideas in a big, huge board, or 40 ideas, big ideas, you may consider having like 5 or 6 dots per person. And it's dot per dimension. So it's 3 dots for impact, 3 dots for feasibility. So each participant gets 6 dots. And what you do typically is you go on your ideas and you put your dots. And it's a free, open-ended process. If one person in the group thinks that this is the idea that is the most powerful and the most impactful, they could put their 3 dots for impact on the one idea. You don't have to do 1, 1, 1. You could do 2, 1, 3, and 1 ideas. You could do whatever you want, right? So it's what your perception is of impactfulness and feasibility. So here we have 2 colors, for example, one for impact and one for feasibility. And we end up with these ideas that are basically have been voted on. What do people think in terms of prioritizing these ideas? The next step, which we'll do this afternoon, so we'll do some of the work for you this afternoon, is to put and I'm just showing it to you so that you get a sense of the process, is to put the idea in a prioritization grid. So at the bottom, we're going to have feasibility, low feasibility, high feasibility, or hard to easy. And we're going to have impact to the learner on the low hand and the high hand. And we're just going to take these ideas, and the ones that have a lot of impact and a lot of feasibility dots, we're going to put in the top right corner. The ones that have the least impact and feasibility dot, we're going to put in the bottom left corner. And we're going to plot those ideas like that. And it says here on the slide, loose guide. It doesn't need to be, it's not like a perfect Cartesian system where you need to have like, it's like loosely speaking, these are medium feasibility, medium impact, low feasibility, high impact, et cetera, right? So we're just gonna go like with our gut feeling, but at the same time, of course, we're following the dots, but we don't need to be exactly, like precise to the millimeter on the scale. That's not the idea here. So we end up with something like this, where obviously you could see the ones that have the most impact and the most feasibility dots are at the top, and the ones that have the highest feasibility but lowest impact are here. And here we have the highest impact and lowest feasibility, right? So and you could see it with the dots, because the dots will be concentrated over certain areas of the grid. And then we interpret that grid, and that's the last step that I'm going to talk about today. So basically, the high impact and high feasibility stuff we normally call the obvious choice, or the no-brainers, right? These are the ideas that we should push forward and we should keep on thinking of and developing and move forward, right? The stuff that's low feasibility and low impact, we probably want to save for later. Like, we don't discard it. We just save it and we say, you know what, maybe that's not a priority right now. It goes on the backlog and we can look at it later on in time. The stuff that's in the middle is the hardest thing to think of. Those are the tough choices. Something that's highly feasible, but that has medium impact as high utilities. Something that has lower feasibility, but could have a lot of impact is a big bet, right? Because we might have to sweat a little bit more in terms of implementation and feasibility, but we know if we pass that hump, we'll get a lot of impact. So we're taking a risk, we're taking a chance, it's a big bet, right? So these ideas sometimes when we do design thinking processes are discussed a little bit more. There's a lot of debate, because the no-brainers, everybody seems to agree on, the leave for later as well. But the stuff in the middle is you get into like interesting discussion about, and then people bring in different perspective and different choices and pros and cons. But at least the grid allows you to get a big picture of how things are laid out in terms of your ideation process. So it's a converged idea board with some interpreting guidelines in it. So if you look at the Myro board right now, I have given you voting dots right here. And I'm going to give you about 7 minutes to go back in the Myro boards, 3 voting dots each, just for the sake of trying the exercise. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ideas on room 5. Everybody will have 3 voting dots for impact, 3 voting dots, and you just grab your dot. Very simple. You could grab it and bring it next to an idea, and you're going to vote on impact and feasibility. So go back to the Myro board and think about, for yourself, look at the top middle bucket, the big ideas, and according to yourself, what are the most impactful and what are the most feasible? And if you feel that you need 4 dots, take 4 dots or 5 dots. I'm not too worried about this right now, okay? And then we'll come back in a few minutes to conclude after this is done. So
Oliver,
Ariana,
would you just address the one question in the chat? Can we vote on other people's boards?
that's sure, why not? Why not? If people want to do a gallery walk of the boards and look at the boards, why not? I have no problem with that. But that's not the idea. Well, normally it's not the idea, but Diane, the idea would be that in an ideal 2.5-hour session, I would have taken all of these ideas for each board, put them on a giant big template, right, during the break, and then everybody could have voted on all the ideas. We would have done a gallery walk through all the ideas and everybody would have walked on these ideas. I hope this makes sense, Diane, what I'm talking about. Okay, Ariana, can we reopen the breakout rooms? And if people want to vote on other boards, you can do a quick gallery walk and look at this. Okay, folks, welcome back. I know that people are excited and it's a lot of fun. And I understand we could have used another hour and a half to go through all this data and all these ideas and all of that. So here's the deal. If you have to go to another concurrent session, of course you have to go. But the board will stay open until noon. Okay, so you don't need to be in this Zoom meeting for the board to work. So we'll leave it open. I'm going to put it in the chat one more time in case somebody wants just join and they want the URL. If you want to keep voting, or you want to keep brainstorming, or you want to keep working on some stuff, or you just want to have a look, please be our guest. Until noon, you're free to do so. At noon, we will lock the board and we will start the data analysis and generating those prioritization grid in the afternoon. So I'll see you tomorrow at the closing plenary, where we will present all these prioritization grids and ideas to members of the university administration, and we will hear their feedback and their thoughts on some of those things.
Thank you so much, Olivier, and thanks to everyone. I'm sorry, I just realized I was unmuted and you heard all my typing. I apologize for that. But great activity on the board. Again, it's open until noon, so go in, do your voting, look at the ideas, get your docs out. The first concurrent session, as I put in the chat, has already started. It started at 10:30. So if you're willing to grab a quick drink or a coffee or water and jump into the next session, that would be appreciated. Otherwise, go visit the TLS website, see what's coming up for the rest of the day. Can we give a huge thank you to Olivier? Please put your hands together for Olivier and his students, his amazing students. Who did so much work preparing for this.
Yes, absolutely. And students who are still going to work this afternoon with us.
We're all working this afternoon with
further process this data. So thank you so much to the students, the volunteers.
Thanks everyone for coming this morning. Much appreciated. We'll feed all of this back to you tomorrow in the closing plenary. Have a great day.